Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Pakistan has summoned French Ambassador Marc Barady to lodge strong protest over republication of blasphemous caricatures. The Foreign Office says it took up the irresponsible statements of French President Emmanuel Macron against Islam. Spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry says Pakistan's sentiments over the Islamophobic incidents were conveyed to the French envoy. The United States says it has killed 5 Taliban fighters in an airstrike in Afghanistan's central Wardak province. The spokesperson for U.S. forces in Afghanistan said the air raid was carried out to defend Afghan forces. Colonel Sonny Leggett said the airstrike was in accordance with the U.S.-Taliban Doha Agreement. In Iraq, clashes have broken out between police and anti-government protesters in the capital city of Baghdad. Police fired tear gas to disperse crowds as some protesters hurled rocks at them. This comes a day after a rally marked the first anniversary of the start of nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Azerbaijan says it has liberated 11 more villages in Zangilan and Jabrayil regions from the Armenian occupation. Earlier, Azerbaijan said Armenia accused each other of violating a U.S.-brokered humanitarian truce. More than 1,000 people have been killed in fighting over the Nagorno-Karabakh region since September 27th. Those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. Pakistan has summoned French Ambassador Marc Barady to protest the republication of blasphemous caricatures. The Foreign Office says it took up irresponsible anti-Islam statements of French President Emmanuel Macron with the diplomat. Earlier, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmoud Qureshi said Macron's remarks have worse intentions. Qureshi said he will propose an annual day against Islamophobia at the OIC Foreign Ministers Conference. The Foreign Minister asserted that nobody can hurt the feelings of millions of Muslims under the garb of freedom of speech. He urged the UN to take note of the ongoing hateful narrative against Islam. Now, Pakistan has urged Facebook to ban Islamophobic content just the way it has banned anti-Holocaust posts. In a letter to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Prime Minister Imran Khan asked him to remove content spreading hate against Muslims. PM Khan says Muslims today are being persecuted akin to the oppression of Jews by Nazis. He said Muslims are abused and vilified on social media platforms. Khan said Facebook should act against this marginalization of Muslims, which inevitably leads to extremism. This comes after French President Emmanuel Macron allowed the publishing of blasphemous cartoons. Now, the resurgence of blasphemous cartoons in France has ignited Muslims to protest worldwide. The protests are being held after the caricatures were also projected on some buildings in France. More in the following report.
Protests have erupted around the globe as publications of blasphemous caricatures in France hurt the sentiments of Muslims worldwide. Protests have been seen in Libya, Syria, Palestine, Pakistan and Bangladesh. Protesters in Dhaka held up cartoons of French President Emmanuel Macron and said he needs mental treatment.
The French president needs mental treatment. He is not only made himself the enemy of Islam, but all of peace-loving people.
Earlier, Macron declared a war on Islamist separatism and refused to give up on the blasphemous cartoons. Several Arab trade associations announced a boycott of French products in response to Macron's statement. French products have also been removed from some shops in Kuwait, Jordan and Qatar.
This is the least we can do in support of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They, the French people, have to respect our religion and principles. They have freedom of speech in this regard, and we also have freedom of speech. They expressed by cartoons, and we will express in economy. Eventually, we will see who is stronger.
Meanwhile, French Foreign Ministry has urged Middle Eastern countries to end calls for a boycott of its goods.
Moving on, the U.S. says it has killed 5 Taliban fighters in an airstrike in the Nerh region of Afghanistan's central Wardak province. The spokesperson for U.S. forces in Afghanistan said the raid was carried out in defense of Afghan government forces. Colonel Sani Leggett said the airstrike was in accordance with the U.S. Taliban Doha agreement. Leggett also rejected the allegations of Afghan civilians' killings in the raid. Pakistan says it will continue playing a role for peace and stability in Afghanistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan said this while addressing the Pakistan-Afghanistan Trade and Investment Forum 2020 in Islamabad. Khan said peace in Afghanistan is important for trade and economic activities in the region. The Prime Minister asserted that Islamabad will maintain strong ties with Kabul no matter who is in power. He warned that India could use Afghan land to try to destabilize Pakistan. At the event, Walisi Jirga Speaker Mir Rahman Rahmani said Kabul values Islamabad's contributions to Afghan peace. He called for enhancing parliamentary contacts between the two countries. And in Iraq, clashes have broken out between police and anti-government protesters in the capital city of Baghdad. Police fired tear gas to disperse crowds as some protesters hurled rocks at them. Protesters are demanding an overhaul of the country's political system. In a repeat of last year's demonstrations, rallies were also held in Iraq's southern towns and cities. This comes a day after a rally marked the first anniversary of the start of nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Around 600 people have been killed since a wave of popular unrest began on the 1st of October last year. And in Yemen, the Saudi-led coalition says it has destroyed another explosive-laden drone launched by the Houthis. State media said the drone was deliberately launched towards civilian territories in Saudi Arabia. This is the second such incident in 24 hours. Yesterday, the coalition said it intercepted a Houthi drone aimed at the kingdom. Now, Azerbaijan says it has liberated 11 more villages in Zangilan and Jabrail regions from the Armenian occupation. Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused each other of violating the latest humanitarian truce. This comes after U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun announced a ceasefire following a meeting with the foreign ministers of both the countries.
Azerbaijan claims Armenian forces have violated a U.S.-brokered humanitarian truce. The Azeri Defense Ministry says Armenian forces shelled villages in the Terter and Lachin regions. However, authorities in the Nagorno-Karabakh have accused Azeri forces of launching a missile attack. Earlier, a joint statement by the United States, Armenia, and Azerbaijan said the ceasefire came into effect this morning. In a tweet, U.S. President Donald Trump congratulated both Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders. Meanwhile, the OSCE Minsk group said its co-chairs and foreign ministers will meet again on October 29th to discuss the issue. It said the talks will focus on starting talks for a comprehensive solution to the conflict. Earlier, Azerbaijan said it liberated several villages of the Zangilan, Jabrail, and Gabaldi regions from the Armenian occupation. More than 1,000 people have been killed in the clashes that erupted on the 27th of September.
Nigeria has imposed curfew in 4 more states as mass protests against police brutality turn violent. 13 states are currently under restrictions. Kaduna State Governor Nasir Ahmed Al-Rufai says the 24-hour curfew has been declared to ban protests. The Deputy Governor of Taraba said the state curfew follows the incident of goods loot at state storehouses. 2 weeks ago, mass demonstrations against police brutality were triggered by the killing of a young man by police. Now, the global number of coronavirus infections has topped 43 million with over 1.15 million deaths. In India, the cases tally has crossed 7.9 million after more than 45,000 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. More in the following report.
Even after months of COVID-19, the world is still struggling to find a way to contain the virus as it continues to relapse. Europe has reported the highest daily surge in cases for the 3rd consecutive day. Hospital admissions and deaths continue to overwhelm the region. France continues to shatter grim record of highest daily cases. Spain has imposed a national emergency and nighttime curfew amid an aggressive outbreak in the country.
Que vivimos es extrema.
To inform you that the government held an extraordinary cabinet meeting that has decreed a state of emergency throughout the country. We are living in an extreme situation. It is in fact the most serious health emergency experienced by Spain since the approval of our constitution in 1978 and also in the last half century.
The number of Russians exposed to the virus has surpassed 1.5 million as the death toll rises over 25,000. The virus-ravaged India is now bracing for another spike in cases due to the mass gathering in the ongoing festive season.
Earlier, people were cautious regarding COVID-19, but now they are getting more careless every day. However, administration is still trying to be strict to no avail. Earlier, the infections in Aligarh were rising at 100 to 150 every day, which is now coming down. But people have definitely become very careless.
Meanwhile, China has reported 137 asymptomatic COVID-19 cases, which is the highest in nearly 7 months.
The coronavirus has claimed 3 more lives in Pakistan overnight, raising the death toll to 6,739. The health ministry says 707 people have tested positive for the disease in the past 24 hours. The ministry said there are over 10,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 328,000 countrywide cases, more than 311,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 143,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 102,000 cases. In the capital city of Islamabad, nearly 19,000 have been infected so far. South Korea is urging citizens to get influenza shots despite 48 deaths following the vaccinations this month. Authorities say they found no direct link between the deaths and the flu shots. Public anxiety over the safety of flu vaccines has surged after the fatalities. Last month, about 5 million doses had to be disposed of after not being stored at recommended temperatures. Last year, more than 1,500 elderly people died within 7 days of vaccination, but the government said deaths were not linked to the shots. Meanwhile, Singapore became one of the first nations to call a temporary halt to the use of 2 influenza vaccines as a precaution. We'll be back with more news after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Chileans have voted overwhelmingly for the country's constitution to be redrafted. With 90% of the votes counted, 78% of the people said yes to a fresh charter. President Sebastián Piñera has accepted the results and praised the peaceful vote. Majority voted for the new constitution to be drafted by a convention comprising of citizens, which will be elected in April. The referendum was prompted by mass protests, which began in Chile a year ago, demanding to fix deep inequalities within society. The old constitution was drafted in 1980 during the Augusto Pinochet military dictatorship. And moving on in the United States, pre-election voting for the November presidential election has surpassed all early ballots cast in 2016. More than 58.7 million Americans have voted so far, compared to around 58.3 million 4 years ago. Pre-election day voting is skyrocketing nationwide amid the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. With 9 days to go in the election, early voting locations have opened in the states of Florida and Texas. Democrats continue to dominate the initial balloting, but Republicans are aggressively narrowing the gap. In Florida, Democrats have outvoted Republicans by a 596,000 margin by mail. With 150 million total votes expected, analysts predict the highest possible turnout in a U.S. presidential election since 1908. Greece says it is planning to expand security relations with the United States. In a parliamentary address, Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias said Athens might sign a new agreement with Washington. Nikos Dendias said Greece will immediately begin a dialogue on the expansion of the Mutual Defense Cooperation Agreement. Dendias said the strengthening of U.S. and Greek relations is evident through recent meetings with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The statement comes as Athens looks for support from allies amid escalating tensions with Ankara in the East Mediterranean. And the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has landed in India, the first leg of a 5-day Asian trip. The tour is aimed at strengthening strategic ties with the regional countries. Pompeo arrived in the capital city of New Delhi along with U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper. The Indian Foreign Ministry said Pompeo will meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. He will later travel to Sri Lanka and the Maldives and conclude his trip in Indonesia on the 30th of October. After a 10-hour standoff, British forces have freed 22 crew members by thwarting a suspected hijacking of an oil tanker off the Isle of Wight. In a tweet, England's Ministry of Defence says 7 suspected hijackers have been arrested. It said the country's special forces descended from military helicopters onto the vessel. The ministry said the Liberian-registered Nave Andromeda ship requested the military assistance. Support was called after on-board stowaways believed to be Nigerians were seeking asylum in the UK became violent. In the Philippines, 12 fishermen are missing after a strong typhoon lashed the southern part of Luzon Island overnight. The Office of Civil Defense says at least 25,000 people have been displaced. Authorities say 20,000 people are taking shelter in evacuation centers. They say the fast-moving typhoon made landfall, flooding rural villages, ripping off roofs, toppling trees and power lines. More than 1,800 cargo truck drivers, workers and passengers are stranded in ports. The storm packed gusts up to 150 kilometers per hour. Officials say MOLAVE will start blowing out of the country into South China Sea today. It will head towards Vietnam on Tuesday. Italian tenor Andrea Bocelli performed on the steps of Sicily's Noto Cathedral. The show was organized in line with COVID-19 regulations. More in this report.
Andrea Bocelli is one of the world's most famous opera singers, who has sold over 90 million records worldwide, and he looked in good spirits as he performed on the steps of Sicily's Noto Cathedral. The performance aimed to launch a message of strength and union among the 7 UNESCO sites in Sicily.
I already came here many years ago. I love Sicily because it is a land that gave birth to many big musicians. For me, it means a lot to sing here.
The tenor was accompanied by the orchestra and the choir of the Theatre Massimo Bellini of Catania, directed by Alberto Bartolini.
And in Finland, nature's most spectacular light show, the Aurora Borealis, lit up the sky above Lapland region, north of the Arctic Circle. Large swathes of green with streaks of white and purple shone through a layer of cloud over the village of Otsujoki. The northern lights are the result of collisions between the Earth's gaseous particles and matter released by the sun's atmosphere. The northern lights are visible on roughly 200 nights a year in the area. And moving on, a 9-day fashion week is underway in Beijing's Art Zone following the easing of coronavirus restrictions. More in the following report.
While international fashion weeks have gone fully digital with few physical runways due to COVID-19, China's domestic fashion weeks are blooming with extravagant offline ceremonies. Crowds packed a former industrial warehouse in Beijing as the China Fashion Week got underway, with models strutting maskless on a square runway and guests oblivious of social distancing norms.
Under different lights, the materials look different. You can feel it if you watch the show offline, such as the gloss, or if it is light enough to float in the air. But if watching online, you cannot feel these kind of characteristics.
After the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic hit, the country's fashion industry saw a rebound in August. The recovery made China a lone bright spot in the retail world for global consumers like Louis Vuitton.
The data of this year will look better and better monthly. Like what I've said, in August, the domestic consumption on clothing increased 4.4%. I think in terms of fashion industry in the fourth quarter, winter clothing is the most important. The value of it is more important than that of summer.
The event will hold nearly 100 activities and 2 fashion contests. It expects to attract not only Chinese but also overseas designers from various countries, including the UK and Peru.
European markets are trading lower as surging COVID-19 cases weigh on sentiment. The pan-European stock 600 has slipped close to 1%, with tech stocks tumbling almost 5%. London's FTSE edged down fractionally, while Frankfurt's DAX plummeted over 2%. The CAC 40 in Paris lost over 0.5%. Italy's FTSE MIB also slid over 1%. Earlier stocks in the Asia-Pacific traded mixed. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.